r/AskReddit. Teachers of Reddit, what is something a student of yours has said that made you think, wow, there is no hope left for you? My stepdaughter goes to an alternative school due to the support they offer for kids with learning disabilities and emotional issues. The largest class she's in is 5, so there's a high level of support. Her mom is abusive, and she is already 17. She's a good kid, but she has an intense sense of justice and feels a need to bring justice if she doesn't feel others are fixing the wrongdoing. Getting it in control now is nearly impossible. I fear for her. The situations she loses her cool are completely rational, but people can't go beat up people like the parents of the child you mentioned. I'm trying to help drive home the point of positive action to fix the problem she sees, but it's hard. We went to the open house and we saw the types of kids these teachers work with. A high percentage of the girls were pregnant. A good portion of them had an absolutely terrible attitude. A couple had ankle bracelets on them. The kids in the school want to graduate. If they didn't, they wouldn't be there. Just there on their last shot. I don't know how the teachers do what they do, but they're all very good at what they do. They have the patience of saints. I student teach for college and I've seen it all. The kids don't just act better / try harder just because there's a student teacher in the room. One kid in a tutoring program had great math skills. I think his name was Caden. 3rd grader doing long division easily. From what I've seen in local schools, long division isn't until 4th grade. He was teaching himself fractions and they were all correct. I'd never seen that, even in gifted classes. The tutoring program was for at-risk kids, most of which didn't have parents at home 90% of the time, so they usually didn't get breakfast or dinner at home, or any kind of praise or study time. Most of them were below the poverty line, or being raised by a barely older sibling. This kid was the only one that tried, and didn't come for the after-school sandwiches. For the first month or 2, he was excited and eager and was glad that I was helping him and being proud. I was fucking impressed. He was being made fun of by the other kids for trying so hard and basically being smart. Over the next 2 months, he started doing less self-teaching and stopped turning in his homework. It was all done and correct, but he'd just stick it in his bag and not turn it in. His grades started dropping and they made fun of him for that. After that, he'd come to tutoring and just put his head down on the desk, eat the sandwich, do a few questions and leave. He eventually stopped coming, and by the next semester I heard that he had started breaking rules and getting in trouble. This poor kid was doing so well, excelling even, and his fear of sticking out turned him into a completely different kid. I don't know what happened to him since I moved to another school. This was 3 years ago, so I can only hope something changed, or he got help, and he went back to normal. Poor Caden. During lunch duty at a high school, had to ask a kid who had a bad rep to move. He pulled over an extra chair to a table, making it so you could not easily get around that area, which was a very clear rule in the school for fire safety reasons. He does, but moves back. I gently remind him again, and say if I see it again I'd have to write him up. He moves back for about 5 minutes. Then, frustrated he can't hear his friends, looks at me, pulls his chair back to the table, hands me his ID and says, "I'm going to jail anyways." Took his ID to get his name, which I already knew, said thanks for cooperating, and then left him the fuck alone. He was in a fight a month later, had to be taken down by 3 school cops and taken out of school in cuffs. Edit. All students had the option to go outside as well for lunch, to be able to sit and talk in larger groups. He was offered that option by both his friends and me, and the weather was nice. The rule seemed stupid until when I was a student there and saw a kid have an allergic reaction and struggled to see adults and nurses get to the kid with 300 students, chairs, and tables in the way. High school teacher here. Recently had something valuable stolen from my classroom. Student who stole it did it after school hour and was caught on video clearly walking into my room then leaving with not long after. Myself and my principal pulled her aside, asked if she stole it. She said no. Showed her the video of her doing it. Still denied it. Brought mom in. Mom said she didn't do it. Showed mom the video of her daughter clearly walking out of my room with it. Still denied it. Told them her daughter was going to face an expulsion hearing, not her first offense, if she didn't apologize, return the item, and come up with a solution on how she was going to make it right. Both still claim she didn't do it. Her expulsion hearing is tomorrow. I understand that you always want to believe your child, but the video is crystal clear and we are offering you an out if you admit to what you've done and make it right. Still nope. Kids need to know there are repercussions for their actions and not just blindly defend everything they have ever done. But yet when this story gets told from mom, this school has it out for her daughter and she has done nothing wrong. The students where I teach are challenging. It's a rural community of about 2,500 people. Lots of troubles at home, and about 95% of all the students straight up don't give a shit. One girl was on her 4th attempt of Science 10 and was again getting 0 because she does nothing and rarely shows up. She was in my class again this year, but she decided to do Adult Basic instead because she will be 18 soon. She failed that too. Another girl gets high every lunch and comes to class blitzed out of her skull, just staring blankly at the paper. Called her parents, but it turned out it was them who smoked pot with her that lunch hour. What I know. One teacher here is severely allergic to perfume. One kid brought some to school and sprayed it in her face. She was in the hospital for almost a week, barely able to breathe through her trachea. Same kid called her a bitch on her first day back. AHH. Monday will be fun. I'm not a teacher, but when I was in 5th grade there was a guy in my class whose parents were among the more affluent in town and that donated a lot of money to the school in every way they could. They paid for the new computer lab and library renovation. They practically owned the school and staff. This guy could scream at teachers, throw desks, attack classmates and never get in trouble because his parents had that much power over them. He sent me to the hospital with my first concussion when he spontaneously slammed my head into a locker. I got 3 detentions because his parents decided the story was I had provoked him, and then another 3 when I refused to apologize to him for said provocation. There never was hope for him. I didn't hear much because we moved to a different city to escape that school, but I heard he dropped out of high school, got his JED, then died serving in Iraq because his parents' influence couldn't get him a job outside their hometown. Most people would call him a hero for that, but he wasn't. I'm a tutor for athletes at a university. Most of them are alright, good enough students, but they have so many scaffolds, tutors, mentors, and a team of adults creating their entire schedules all the way down to when they eat, study, and sleep, that sometimes they think they are not responsible for any of it. They don't know when their own exams are. They usually ask me. I'm a tutor, not a scheduler. They always walk into the tutoring session asking what are we doing today, and that's not how it works. They need to tell me what they need help with. Otherwise, I have no idea what chapter they're in or what they're doing in class. I'm not allowed to be in contact with their professors or TAs. That's their job. A lot of them are clearly only there to play football. Some have even told me as much and only want to pass their classes for this reason. They are not thinking about careers outside the NFL. The worst part is, most of this is the fault of the school. The school gives them so many scaffolds so they can keep their star athletes who would otherwise fail out their first semester. The school wants them to focus on football instead of classes because they bring in money. They have study halls where the athletes walk in and are handed a sheet detailing what assignments they need to finish that day and sit next to mentors who make sure they actually get finished. No wonder they ask me what to do. As a student who is not an athlete, it actually makes me angry, thinking how easy college would be if I had all those scaffolds. But the university is basically setting them up for failure. If they don't go on to play in the NFL, who is going to hire them? Edit. I feel like I should mention, this is not all the athletes, and not even all the football players, though they tend to be the biggest culprits. I usually run into this problem when the athlete himself didn't request the tutor, me, but a mentor or supervisor did, after they got a bad grade. Sometimes they don't even know they're getting a tutor until I show up. The whole thing is terribly mismanaged, but in particular, if they need a tutor but don't want one, it's indicative of this larger issue. But if students request a tutor themselves, they're usually much more competent individuals. I was giving a final exam. A girl was sitting on her feet in a very unbalanced computer chair wobbling back and forth. I told her 3 times to sit with her feet flat on the floor. She kept putting them down and then slowly working them back under her ass again every time I passed. Finally, she fell over and crashed hard onto the floor, then proceeded to start laughing at the top of her lungs and rolling up and down the floor. The entire class was totally distracted, and this was a final where you needed every minute to be able to finish. When I finally managed to get her to stop laughing, I told her that she was disqualified from the final and that she was to report to the assistant principal's office immediately. She asked me what the problem was. I told her that repeatedly ignoring my request to sit properly in the chair was bad enough without the crash and the tremendous distraction. She said, "I bet it's only a problem because I'm black." Good God. It's like, please keep thinking that and you sit to justify your outrageous behavior. Not a teacher, but some guy I know dropped out of school at the age of like 12 because he was bullied. Note, I don't believe that to be the cause. He then spent the next 8 years chain smoking in his nan's front room, playing computer games and smoking weed/drinking. Now at the age of 16 he was eligible for some benefits from the government, but he even then was too lazy to just go down the job center and get someone to fill in the forms for him. If he fakes dyslexia, he could read and write fine, could do basic maths no problem, and was very street smart, so even free money couldn't tempt him to get out of the house. Eventually I landed him a manual labor gig in which he lasted 2 weeks, going home early because it was too hard, and then got fired. A few months pass and he gets a gig in a local off license owned by a friend's parents. Gets fired because he was asked to dispose of some cardboard boxes by ripping them up and putting them in the recycle container. Boss comes back at the end of the day to find that he has literally sat there and torn half a box up by hand into tiny squares. Gets fired on the spot. A couple more years pass, and this time another friend hooks him up in a care home where he does night shifts. Suits him fine, as all he does is minor requests for the people there. As far as I know, he's still employed there, and I suppose the moral of the story is, even if you think there is no hope for some people, all they really need is the right environment to do what is needed, and that's it. He's an alright guy, okay friend, but honestly I can't help to feel like he has so much wasted potential at something. Still wondering if he'll stick with that job or just sack it, but honestly I sincerely hope that the better side of humanity prevails here and he keeps working at something. I was a student observing this situation. My 10th grade teacher's dad died. She went to the Philippines for the funeral. When she came back, the sub had left her incredible details notes for how shitty the students were. She went on a semi-long and well-deserved rant about how disappointed she was in us and how she came home from the funeral of one of the most important people in her life to see that all the supplies she put her own money into for our benefit were destroyed, stolen, and vandalized. We all felt bad, of course, until that kid opened his mouth. This kid got up and said, "Your dad is still dead though." Completely unprovoked and uncalled for. We all knew what he said was fucked up. She didn't respond. She left the room. A security lady took over the class about 10 minutes later until the school found a teacher with a free period and eventually a sub. We didn't see her for another 4 days after that. Apparently the comment messed with her a lot more than she allowed us to view. She was insanely close to her dad, according to her colleagues. How to state this? I work with autistic elementary students, primarily nonverbal or lower functioning. Now in one hand you could say they are not going to change just on the state of their disorder. However, you'd be surprised the amount of personality present and how their environment and parents can have an effect on their behavior. So I work with one kid closely. I love the little brat dearly. He is probably our most verbal student and talks in a very squeaky voice. He is always quoting or saying something in his own head, often from television shows, and sometimes it is the cutest thing. However, for a long time he has been a brat. In trying to go to class, we could not get him to sit down and do one problem without him fighting us to get up and run around the room like a madman. If we tried to get him to do his work or send him to timeout, which we call break, he would get frustrated and start screaming or crying, kind of disruptive to the class as a whole. So, we implemented a structured way of doing things. Very basic: 2 minutes of work, 2 minutes of play. If you don't do your work, yell, or scream, then you take a 2-minute break in the corner. As you can imagine, this didn't go so well at first. Literally fought the kid for 2 to 3 weeks over this concept, and he spent plenty of days doing no work and all his time in the corner screaming his brains out. After that, he started to get it, and guess what? He is usually our star student. I said usually, though, and here are a few things I found interesting and relevant to the parent thing a lot of commenters have been talking about. During that initial period, there was a moment in break where he was just sobbing and crying and couldn't pull himself together. Snot was coming out of his nose and he asked, "I need a tissue." So, I got him a tissue, and when I brought it to him, he leaned forward, as if for me to wipe his nose for him. I said, "No, you can do this yourself," to which he responded with an even louder shriek, and even more crying ensued. It was readily apparent that this was something he was used to at home. He was used to literally getting everything he wanted, hand over foot, at home, to the point where mom was wiping his nose for him. 2. Any period of break from school, a weekend, winter vacation, etc., we would see a lot of these behaviors come back. It was literally like a reset, and we would once again have to spend more time in break than usual to kick those habits back out. Clearly, things at home are vastly different than at school. 3. A lot of what he quotes in his babble reflects what comes from home. You can imagine the stuff coming from an abused parrot similar to what I experience. Luckily for me, it's not a lot of swearing. However, when the child gets frustrated, he'll start saying things like "shut the door," and whatever other meddlesome language you can imagine angry parents might yell. It is a little disheartening. I love the children I work with, but when you hear and see this stuff, you just wish there was a lot more you could do at home. I'm sure this kid has a bright future for his level. He may even make it to be independent enough to live on his own. However, I still wish I could do more for him. There was this kid named Lawrence who was one of those typical wallflower Catholic kids I grew up with. His dad was in our scout troop as a leader and was really meticulous. Like everything had to be just so. In the late 70s, most of the troop leaders had a relaxed dress code, but Lawrence's dad dressed like a 1940s scouting manual model, complete with a brown uniform and wide-brimmed hat. Everything was pleated and pressed. His dad drove an old Milligram Roadster that was constantly breaking down. They were upper class, and mom was not in the picture. But the way Lawrence's dad picked on him was brutal. "Stand up straight, Lawrence. Chin up. Be a good lad. Chest out. Chin up. Lawrence. Don't go over there. It's dirty over there. Lawrence. Stand straight and tall when I address you. Don't be rude. Wait until I have started eating before you start. Lawrence. Do I have to raise my voice, Lawrence?" By high school, Lawrence just gave up. He wasn't perfect enough, so why bother? He stared into space. He attended school in person only, just a blank and hollow shell. His clothing didn't change, it only became dirtier. His hair got long. He lost weight, and his clothes just hung on him. I think the only way to deal with his dad's control issues was passive resistance. By his senior year in high school, he flunked out. Not sure what happened to him after that. I had a student who has a severe mental disability, but was quite gifted in maths. But he has told myself, other adults in the room, the special education department head, and school psychologist he is going to drop out of high school to be a YouTuber. Mom and dad are in serious denial of this fact, but he is dead set on it. You can see it in his eyes. In other news, it seems that the generation of students I have now want to be either YouTubers or professional video game players. I was born in the late 80s, and when I was their age, I remember having classmates being sternly told the actual statistics of them becoming professional athletes. I still have 2 to 3 former classmates, graduated high school in 2007, that are dead set on making it into the NFL, but never played in high school or college. I feel this is the same with the kids I'm seeing now. They do not truly understand the extremely low chance of them becoming pro in social media. Edit. Had to note this was a former student, not a current one. No idea why I wrote in the present, even though I do currently have students who believe the same thing. I had him in my 3rd year of teaching, and there were other issues too in that family. I had a student who was always acting up. I constantly tried talking to him about his behavior, and I wrote plenty of referrals. Throughout all of this I would email and call his mother, but never got a response. One day he was pacing around and texting someone. I told him to put his phone away, and he said I can't. I'm not too happy right now, so I said, will you take it out to the hall, and I'll give you 1 minute? His response really shook me. He said no, I'll sit down. I just want my mom to turn the water back on. When all you know about a student is what you see in the classroom, it can be easy to forget they may not have a great home life. So I did wonder, is there hope for him? But it also wasn't truly any fault of his own. He just had a shit home life, where he was stricken by poverty. This is how my niece is. It's terrible. She's 15 and should be worrying about school and college. Instead she worries about getting the younger kids up, getting them dressed and fed. On Monday she texted me asking if I could drop off some bread and milk and cereal. It's just so frustrating, because there are 3 adults in that house and none of them work. They're just junkies. Edit. We have called CPS more times than we can count. Her mother had her at 15, and then just kept having kids. My soul also grew up in a similar home to the one she's providing now. I really just think it's one of those cycles that she just didn't break. Her thought processes, I grew up like this, so why make it any different for my kids? All 4 of them have different dads and only one of them has a dad that's involved. I have been here before about the type of students I work with. However, I have had one student who was in year 9. The more I got to know him, the more I realized he was screwed. Not only could he barely read or write, even his own name was a struggle, but he lacked any life experience that even the hard cases I worked with had. Anyhow, he was gifted at shoplifting and knew how to survive on the streets for weeks if necessary. He had been removed from his home more than 10 times and always ended up being returned. He begged for help from various departments and agencies to no avail. I did what I could, sometimes more than I was allowed, and taught him the most basic reading and writing. One day he casually mentioned his plan to end his life, as that was the only positive thing he could look forward to. I got him in a professional support group, which he quickly left as he has no trust in professionals. Short version of outcome is he is still alive and has been returned to his family. He no longer attends school, still plans that one day he won't be around, but keeps in contact with me during his hard times. I struggle to understand what he has already been through in his life. I can't imagine where he will end up, don't want to, and I'm afraid of the day I hear he is not around anymore. I do have hope for him, but experience tells me. Not a teacher, but my wife had a student in 3rd grade who refused to do any writing assignments. My wife told him that she was going to call his parents to explain to them what was going on if he didn't start doing his work. He said, I don't care. My mom said I don't have to do anything I don't want to do. Rules don't apply to me. My wife called his mom and his mom told my wife that she, meaning my wife, just has to understand how her son is, and if he doesn't want to do the work, then he doesn't have to. His behaviors all made sense after that, and it was a very tough year. He stopped doing all work and started harassing other kids, probably partially due to boredom, since he was doing nothing else by the end of the year. As long as he was happy, my wife couldn't get the mom on board. I taught lower elementary. Most teachers will get frustrated at some point by how hard it can be to get a child who may be lacking upstairs some extra help. This was the case with one of my favorite students. It didn't matter that he couldn't do any of the work that his peers were doing due to his incredibly low IQ. He was performing at his ability level. But he was just so nice to everyone. I had set aside time every day to help him with his reading. We were using the short story of The Ugly Duckling. It had one short sentence on each page, and after 2 weeks, he could get through it with minimal help. However, reading the words isn't all there is to reading. I had asked him if he could tell me what the story was about, since we had spent time on it every day for the last 2 weeks. He starts his oral retelling off great, and I'm super excited. This is a huge deal for my man, because up until this point, I couldn't get any retell or comprehension out of him. I'm super pumped, and he is feeding off my energy and he's so proud of himself. This kid is glowing. We are only 3/4 through the story though. We come up to the end of The Ugly Duckling, and he's telling me that the duckling changes. This word took is forever to say, much less read. But then he stops and goes into this deep think stage. I prod him a little bit. He changes? What does he change into, bud? He brings his eyes back from the ceiling, and then with the biggest smile, he shouts out a butterfly. I work at an alternative school for kids kicked out of public school for severe emotional and behavioral issues. A lot of them are going to require government services for the rest of their lives. There's usually not just one thing they say, but we know that they will never have normal lives. It's a little disheartening to hear a 6-year-old scream that he's going to fucking kill you, especially when you were playing tag not 5 minutes before. There's a young boy who can be very sweet and is an adorable blonde butterball. However, he has pretty severe behaviors and gets restrained at some point on a daily basis. I saw his parents one day because they live in government subsidized housing close by and walk him to school. It was 50 degrees out and the little boy was in a basketball jersey and shorts. His parents looked exactly how I expected them to look and were rude to all the staff they interacted with. It just showed me that no matter how much we do, he spends most of his life with his shitty parents. Edit. Having a child with behaviors doesn't inherently make someone a bad parent. But in our program specifically, most of the students come from harsh backgrounds which either causes or exacerbates their behavior. Thank you so much for watching the whole video. Please leave a like and subscribe.